Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. So there are new media reports coming in of Israeli attacks against targets inside of Syria, specifically around the Damascus metropolitan area. And it sounds like these targets are Iranian militia units and Iranian infrastructure, ammunition targets that Israel has identified for destruction. So, let's say the Al Jazeera is reporting that Syrian air defenses intercept Israeli aggression over Damascus. So, what does that mean? That Syria has intercepted Israeli aggression. Well, if you also listen to some other news outlets, you'll hear that that Syrian air defense units has targeted Israeli fighter aircraft, conducting strikes allegedly over Syria. Well, they're not specifically targeting the Israeli aircraft. The Israeli aircraft are not over Syrian airspace. As a matter of fact, a lot of times the Israelis can launch these airstrikes while over the Mediterranean Sea, depending on the type of munitions that they're using. They can also, a method that the Israeli uses is they would take off at an airbase inside of northern Israel. And as you know, the Israelis control Mount Hermon. So there's a mountain range here. So the Israelis fighter bombers take off and they try to stay as close to the height of the mountain where they cannot be picked up by Syrian air defense systems. And then they pop up above the just above the mountain range, and they release their munitions. And a lot of times they could be quite possibly actually inside of Israel. And the depending on the munitions that they're using, if they're using Delilah cruise missiles, a Delilah is a long-range cruise missile, so to speak, at range of over 100 miles. Well, I won't say it's long range, but it's a smaller cruise missile, but it packs enough punch to destroy a building or a vehicle or what have you. So Israel launches these attacks, again, inside of Israel or near Lebanon or over Lebanon. And, you know, a lot of these targets are about 45 miles away from the release point of the aircraft. So a lot of times the Syrian air defense systems are just getting intermittent hits, depending on the type of aircraft that are being used. And given the size of the precision-guided munitions, it can be challenging for the Syrian air defense systems to see these missile systems or these glide bomb systems coming into range. They usually don't see them until they're just a few kilometers from their target, because the radar system simply does not pick up that small of a target until they get closer. So the closer they get, the better the radar defense system can see the target, and then the response time is usually a little too late, and then the missile hits the target. So Israeli aircraft are not really flying over Syria per se. They're flying outside of Syria. And for the most part, the Israelis, I mean, they have remote sensing satellites that are in space that can see targets at very high resolutions inside of Syria. So the need for actual manned aircraft to fly over Syria is limited. The Israelis are also using the F-35 Lightning, the United States stealth multi-role fighter aircraft, and that can fly over Syria. It will probably fly at a high altitude at night, and it is using its electro-optical sensing system that is inside of the aircraft that makes it really unique. It's a really high quality system that can see great distances at night in the thermal spectrum, and they can fly over. And I don't believe that the Syrians can see these aircraft. They may get the Russians based systems up north and kind of around Latakia, can probably get intermittent hits, so to speak, possibly off these Israeli aircraft, but they can't do active tracks. And they really have to have an active track in order to uh, launch a missile, and then that missile has to go active, and then that missile has to then see the actual aircraft, and that just is not happening. And we believe that the Syrians have upgraded versions of the S-300, while they don't have the S-400. The Russians have the S-400 in Syria. None of these systems that we know of have been successful in shooting down Israeli aircraft. They may be able to see intermittently Israeli aircraft, but obtaining accurate tracks and being able to launch missile systems against Israeli targets. Because, I mean, if you look at the S-300 specifications, it can allegedly shoot down targets up to 100 miles, right? You would believe that if there was an Israeli aircraft flying over northern Israel or over the Mediterranean or Lebanon, that these S-300 systems would be able to shoot down Israeli aircraft. Well, they haven't been able to. And from a Syrian point of view, I mean, Israel is actively attacking targets inside of Syria, both military targets and targets of its allies who are based inside of Syria. So that's an act of war. And Syria would have every right shooting down said Israeli aircraft, but they don't, because they can't. And that is not a knock against the quality of Syrian air defense as well, in terms of maybe training and use of its systems. Its systems just can't simply see the Israeli aircraft and gain tracks and then launch missiles. Occasionally, I mean, we've heard of the Syrian shooting down Turkish jets, and I believe that was an older F-4. It was over the Mediterranean. So that's a bit different than kind of what's going on with the Israelis. And I think the Turks have learned a little bit since that shoot down, and they've modified their tactics, and we haven't seen really any Turkish aircraft be shot down since that one incident. And I think they're mimicking what the Israelis are doing, and it's strictly standoff. They don't get into Syrian airspace. Again, the closer you get to these systems, then the greater risk your aircraft are at being shot down. But the Israelis are just staying out of that envelope. They're not getting near it. They're probably at best 40 miles from the Syrian border at times, and the Syrians just don't have the ability to shoot down these Israeli aircraft. But it looks like the Israelis are going to continue to degrade targets inside of Syria, specifically any sort of Hezbollah targets or any targets that are operated by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. They are actively engaging in destroying a multitude of targets weekly inside of Syria, around Damascus. And Damascus is a very protected area in terms of air defenses, and it has increased its air defense capacity since the Russian intervention. But they have not been effective in deterring Israel.